Well, good morning. It's good to be here in the house of the Lord. Good to have you here. Does anyone else take the greatness of God for granted at times? I lose track of it sometimes. I forget just how big God is and what He has accomplished and what He has allowed us to accomplish. And that's why we sang that song there today. Because we need to keep that in our vision, don't we? The greatness of God, especially as this world beats us down continually with horrible things going on. We need to remind ourselves God's still in control, and we've read the back of the book, and He wins. Nothing's going to change that. I don't care what politicians say, or this group of people or that group of people. God's still going to win. His prophecies, His promises throughout the Bible have come true, continue to come true, and they will all be fulfilled at one point. Amen? That's right. All right. So we're in the 25th chapter of Acts. So we have spent a lot of time dealing with or studying what Paul went through in his own name and for his own riches and glory. No. Paul was the opposite of that. Even when people wanted to give him praise, wanted to give him accolades, he always pointed them to Jesus. Pointed them to the Messiah. Through thick and thin, he always served God first, didn't he? And it would be easy to allow that to go to your head, wouldn't it? I mean, look at all these great big churches. That's what happened. Some of them may have started out on a good path, but they got to a point where they let their ego take over. And what happens when you let your ego take over in your service to God?
It's about you, not God.
It becomes about you instead of God. And that's never a good recipe for success, is it? In God's eyes. So, but we know that Paul was good at keeping things in perspective. That once he surrendered to Christ, he was all in all the time. Wasn't he? And I know that I can't say that I have been all in all the time. But I could be all in from today forward all the time. So let's look at where Paul is. Paul has been in Caesarea for 2 years. Felix didn't know what to do with him. Felix pretty much didn't want to resolve it. He wanted to kick the can down the road. And so when they called, I'll just give you a little history. Felix left Caesarea because he was called to Jerusalem, or called to Rome, to answer for what was going on in Jerusalem, because he was the governor of that area. And there was a big kind of a battle going on between the Jews and the Romans. And it was over Christianity. And so he was summoned to give an account. Well, they all, and when I say the battle between the Jews and the Gentiles, and it was over Christianity, wasn't it? And Agrippa was in Jerusalem, wasn't he? And Felix supported Agrippa because they all supported each other. That's the one thing you can always guarantee with politicians. They may disagree about issues, but they'll always support that whole pool of people, won't they? They take care of themselves. It's funny, the only time we can get a unanimous vote is when they're voting to give themselves a raise or to increase their benefits. Then it's bipartisan, isn't it? Because that's the nature of politicians, isn't it? They're self-serving people. They do what's best for them. And this is no different. So Festus was sent to Caesarea to take over that while this is being sorted out. So, and we know the lineage of Felix, that his wife comes from a long line of not from a good family, right? Yeah. But what we're going to see today is Paul exercising his rights. And that's not something we as Christians talk a lot about, do we? Because we're not ones rioting. We're not starting upheaval. We're not burning down buildings. We're not assassinating people because they don't agree with us, do they? But here, we will see today that Paul exercises his rights. And so as Christians, we do and should exercise our rights, shouldn't we? So, in the chapter 25 and verse 1, now when Festus was come to the province, after 3 days he ascended from Caesarea to Jerusalem. So he just gets there, and 3 days later he has to go to Jerusalem because of all that's going on in Jerusalem. So he's going to have to deal with Felix's problems. And that's what happens when you have a big problem and you just ignore it. It usually doesn't go away, does it? It can explode, can it? And that's where the world is right now. When you talk to them about Jesus, they go, well, I just don't want to really think about that. I think it'll all work out at the end. Okay, that's just ignoring it, isn't it? What I am telling people now when I talk to them about Jesus is you are given the right of freedom of choice by God. It is your right. You can exercise it. You do not get that right, though, without consequences. It does not mean that you can make any choice you want and never have to pay a price for that. You know, if I go into a bank and rob it, God may forgive me for that, but is there going to be a consequence for that? Well, it was my freedom of choice to do that, yes, but there's still going to be a consequence. That same scenario is a part of our lives when it comes to salvation. You could choose to ignore God, but he's not going to go away, is it? So he has to go to Jerusalem because of all the upheaval there between the Jews and the Gentiles. And then the high priest and the chief of the Jews informed him against Paul and besought him. So as soon as he gets there, what do the Jews do? Oh, we got to tell you about this guy. He's just a horrible person. And they gave him the whole, yeah, you know, you're up to no good. Scheming and conniving. And they get him right off the bat, want to get him on their side. And so they're presenting their case before it even goes before him. In verse 3, and desired favor against him that he would send for him to Jerusalem, laying wait in the way to kill him. So they made their case right off. Go, listen, we really need to handle this. Needs to be handled in Jerusalem. Why don't you send for him and get him down here? Okay? And knowing Roman political figures, they were always figuring angles, weren't they? I mean, they were, as governors, they would get in trouble if they missed an angle, an opportunity, or guessed wrong on how something would turn out, right? So Festus is going to think about this. And their intent was not to try him in Jerusalem. They just wanted an opportunity to kill him on the way down. Their hearts hadn't softened, had it? And that's the bad thing about when we let our heart harden. It takes a while to soften it back up, doesn't it? And we've all been in situations where we have been wrong. Our heart has gotten hard, and it takes time. That's why it's better to try to keep your heart from getting hard. But the Jews were way beyond that. Like I said, they were already worked through anger, already worked through rage, and now they're living in the world of contempt. They have nothing but contempt against the Christian way, do they? The Gentiles, and namely, more specifically, Paul himself. But Festus answered that Paul should be kept at Caesarea, and that he himself would depart shortly thither. So he figured out, okay, this may not be in my best interest if I let them call the shots. Because as a Roman figure, he definitely wasn't going to let a group of people give him orders, was he? And he wanted to get back to his palace as quickly as possible. So he decided against their request and chose to keep Paul at Caesarea. So, let them therefore, he said, which among you are able to go down with me and accuse this man, if there be any wickedness in him. So here, Festus is actually talking to those from the Sanhedrin, their religious court. So he's talking to them. Who's going to come down to, and why does he say who's going to come down to Caesarea? Wasn't Caesarea more north than Jerusalem? Yes. They say this because Jerusalem was about 2,000 feet higher in elevation than Caesarea. Caesarea being on the coast was, and so that's why when you see them talking about coming down, they're actually talking about coming down the mountain, not down as in north to south. So, and when he had tarried among them more than 10 days, he went down unto Caesarea, and the next day, sitting on the judgment seat, commanded Paul to be brought. And when he was come, the Jews which came down from Jerusalem stood around about and laid many grievous complaints against Paul, which they could not prove. So what were the allegations they were going to present before Festus? What had Paul done in their eyes? He had broken the law. He was undermining their culture. He was creating seditious situations, wasn't he? What else? What was another one? What? Blasphemy, yeah. They always throw that one in there for good measure. But mainly, they're still mad that he was a Pharisee and he got saved. It's really what they're mad about. You talk about holding on to something forever. They're still mad that he used to be one of them, and now he doesn't rail against them, but he definitely preaches the word of salvation to them, doesn't he? And the fact that his main message to the Jews was the Messiah came. He was here. Salvation has been completed. He died and he arose from the grave and ascended to heaven. All of which was foretold and prophesied in the Old Testament. It's happened. And he even said in the last chapter, he said, I believe in the law. I keep the law. I keep the writings of the prophets. I have studied them. I am still like that. But the Messiah has come. And that's where they had fits. And he believed in the resurrection like the other Pharisees believed. So they laid many grievous complaints which could not prove. And we know that when you put somebody on trial, today you have to have evidence, don't you? Like if I did go and commit a crime and was in another town when that happened, they would have to prove that I was actually here, that I had the means, the opportunity, and the motive to commit that crime. That is still one of our rights as an American, isn't it? And as a Christian, we still have that right to exercise those, don't we? So while he answered for himself, neither against the law of the Jews, neither against the temple, nor yet against Caesar, I have offended any of these things. So Paul tells them, I haven't broken the law. I haven't defiled the temple. He's followed all the temple rules when he goes in there for cleansings. And he has not broken the law of Caesar, has he? And he's saying, I have committed none of these. But Festus, willing to do the Jews a pleasure. Now, why would Festus be willing to do the Jews a favor? Okay. Hoping to get a payoff, isn't he? It just always boils down to money, doesn't it? It's like you always say when you're investigating a crime, follow the money. See where it ends up. So, he was willing, he wanted to side with the Jews because, and look at it from his perspective, you had one single person over here, and you had a large group of wealthy people that paid taxes. Who does the government want to side with? The money. Yeah. So he wanted to do a pleasure and answered Paul and said, wilt thou go to Jerusalem and there be judged on these things before me? So he's asking, why is he asking Paul if he's willing to go to Jerusalem to be tried? Is he not the governor? He is the governor, but Paul's a Roman citizen, so he can't. He needs Paul to volunteer to go to Jerusalem. So, the fleshly side of Festus wants to turn him over to the Jews, but he still has to give Paul his rights. So, wilt thou go up to Jerusalem and there be judged of these things before me? Then said Paul, I stand at Caesar's judgment, meaning I am a Roman citizen, where I ought to be judged. To the Jews have I done no wrong, as thou very well knowest. So if he had actually tore down the temple, or went in the temple and defiled it, or burned some of the scrolls, would the Jews have had a legitimate crime they could charge him with? Yes, he did none of those things. And he's saying here, I have not broken any of Caesar's laws, nor Jewish law. And you know it, because you have heard, you've gathered enough information that you know this. For if I be an offender, or have committed anything worthy of death, he what? I refuse not to die. So he's saying, if you can prove that I have done these things, I gladly, or not gladly, but I accept the penalty of death. He's not trying to get out of it. If you can prove that I have done something worthy of the death sentence, then I will calmly walk to my death. So he will accept the judgment if it's proven. But if there be none of these things whereof these accuse me, no man may deliver me unto them. So I appeal to Caesar. There's the catchphrase. So if they can't prove that I've broken any Jewish law and have a right to take me to Jerusalem, then I stand before Caesar and I appeal to Caesar. And that's monumental there. And in the last verse we're going to cover today, and then Festus, when he had conferred with the council, answered, Hast thou appealed unto Caesar? Unto Caesar shall thou go. So, because that's all he could do. Because if he had went against that request, he had the right. It's like when you go before a judge, you can ask for a trial of your peers. You can ask for a bench trial for misdemeanors. You can, there are options, but it's at your request. You have the right to choose that. And he had the right to appeal to Caesar. That's what he did. And Festus knew he could do nothing about that. So Paul, when I say he exercised his rights because he knew what would happen if he went to Jerusalem. He knew that. God had let him in on that. So he knew he needed to go to where? Where would he go from Caesarea? Rome. He would go to Rome. And as I've said before, while Paul was in Rome, did he just lie around and do nothing? How many letters did he write from Rome? A whole bunch of them. He continued the ministry, even under house arrest. He continued to work for God. So he is appealed to Caesar, and Festus says, to Caesar you will go. And that's where we'll end for today. And we'll pick up the next leg of this chapter next week.